If everyone can hear me okay, that's great. If you can't, just say in the chat, and hopefully there's something I can do there. But anyway, so we are joined today by a number of trustees, and the aim of this session is to cover Gomde UK's journey to a carbon neutral future. And my name is Jason Briggs, and I'm host for today, and I'm part of the development committee for Gomde. What we're trying to do here is on the committee is really kind of raise and complete the aims of the Gomde Trustee Board through fundraising and volunteering. So a number of you will know of Gomde and some of you won't. So just to say that Gomde is a UK-based Buddhist centre, and it offers authentic Buddhist teachings and facilities for study, practice and solitary retreat. It's set in Lindholme Estate in Doncaster, and this is a beautiful 100-acre piece of land. And it's also a place of scientific interest due to its rare biodiversity, which has some context for today's discussion. So in recent developments, at the direction of their spiritual teacher, Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche, Gomde has drawn up plans to build a traditional Tibetan Buddhist temple on their grounds. And the aim here is for it to become a beacon in the West, and the hope that it inspires, preserves and teaches Dharma for generations to come. And part of that teaching is to set an example really to the world of an ecologically sound organisation, i.e. one that is carbon neutral. And it's those plans and within the history of those plans that we want to share today. So on the agenda, we've got 4 great speakers, and they're all going to present for about 10 to 12 minutes each. And then at the end, there'll be a Q&A and discussion. We hope the session will be about an hour long. There's a slight extension there on questions if we need it. And I'm just going to read out the agenda so everybody can see it. So the first speaker that we have is Louise Hill, and she's consultant ecologist and member of the Lindholme Management Group. And Louise will share the history of Lindholme Island, its formation in the last ice age, how its peat bog came into existence, and what we need to do to protect it. We'll then move on to David Benjamin, who is a Gomde trustee and a building project manager. And he will provide an on-the-ground perspective of what we've done so far to achieve the reduction of emissions, as well as a step-by-step guide on how they will become carbon neutral. We'll then move on to Murray Rudd, who is an environmental economist. And as an environmental economist, he will provide context around what they hope to achieve from a climate change perspective. And lastly, we will end with Erik Solomon, and he's a Dharma teacher and co-author of Radically Happy. Erik will share the Buddhist perspective on the environment and climate change, linking the inner and outer environment. So just before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. Please do say hello in the chat where you're from. So you've got a chat box at the bottom. Please say hello and where you're from. It'd be great to see who's with us today. And whilst we're doing the presentations, do feel free to make comments in the chat as you like, and have a discussion about some of the content that's coming through. The questions, you'll also see at the bottom a Q&A box. Please do ask your questions in there, and we'll gather them up and ask them at the end. There is an upvote function, so the more you can vote a question, then the more likely we'll be able to answer it. And just to say that the session today is being recorded, so we can use that to kind of facilitate the learning about this project wider than just today, of course. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Louise, when you're ready, to please start to share your screen, and we can begin with the first presentation. So you just need to turn on your video. That's right. And so Louise Hill will be presenting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to start my presentation, hopefully. I thought I'd just switch on my my video so you can see me, but I prefer to give the presentation without the video on because I think it probably would distract while I'm talking. Okay. Right, introduce yourself, Louise Hill. I'm a resident of Doncaster, and in this presentation I want to introduce you to Lindholme Island, and the work of its voluntary organisation set up to assist the landowner with the care of a relict area of Maya habitat in the middle of Hatfield Moors. My own interests are focused on botany and habitat management. I've been involved with this site since the early 1990s. I'm going to split the presentation into 3 topics. Firstly, I'll introduce you to the special habitats that make the make this important peatland, and especially how it developed. I'll then provide a brief overview of the research and practical work that the group has been carrying out, and then I will touch on the issue of the fire, which damaged nearly 40% of Hatfield Moors in May 2020, and the implications that this has for the future management of the island and also its role as a carbon sink. In the UK, lowland raised mires predominantly occur in the cool, humid regions such as the northwest lowlands of England, but remnants still occur in the southern and eastern areas such as Somerset, South Yorkshire and the Fenlands. The main influences on mire formation are precipitation and temperature, and usually they develop in very wet areas where there is excess rainfall over what is called evapotranspiration. So that's water loss through the action of plants sucking up water out of the soil and evaporating it out of their leaves. The vegetation of raised mires is both adapted to and in part controls the chemical environment, and sphagnum mosses tend to resist decay, and they're a primary constituent of peat. This accumulation of the partially decayed remains of plants gradually raises the growing surface so that the mire is convex in cross-section with a domed central area elevated above the surrounding land. This raised area becomes hydrologically separated from the surrounding land. The origins of the development of Hatfield Moors in particular is still a matter of study and debate, but in essence, the area was a low-lying landscape of gently undulating sand dunes. In the centre is a large fluvio-glacial deposit from the last ice age, which is what we know as Lindholme Island. In Neolithic times, the area was a landscape of open birch and pine forests. The annual precipitation of this area is only 600 millimeters per year, so you can see it's much lower than the normal range in areas where mires develop in the UK. The photograph in the bottom right shows you a picture of a raised mire in Sweden, which is similar to how Hatfield must once have looked. The mires of Thorn and Hatfield Moors have been exploited for the extraction of moss peat for many years, and the extraction methods and drainage became ever more efficient. Eventually, the area resembled a brown desert with dry peat blowing in the wind as the milling machines worked across the desiccated and featureless landscape. In 2004, English Nature bought out most of the mineral rights from the peat milling companies, and the site began to be restored. They are internationally important peatland habitats, but in many places, less than half a metre of peat remains over the sand, particularly in Hatfield. But one of the large areas with the deepest peat was in the ownership of the Lyon family, who refused to allow peat cutting. This area is what's known as Jack's Piece locally, named after the owner. And it's the area outlined in red on this slide. In November 2009, the Gomde purchased Lindholme estate from Jack's son, David. The estate covers 150 acres, but funding for the purchase of the whole area was not available. So it was agreed that only 120 acres would be purchased. In late 2011, Heather Skidmore approached the new landowner as she wanted to have a plaque on the land in memory of her late husband, Dr. Peter Skidmore, who made a lifelong study of the invertebrates of the moors. Heather learned of the option to purchase the remaining 30 acres that, in her view, represented the jewel in the crown in terms of conservation. A successful fundraising appeal was set in motion, and the 30 acres were purchased. this area became referred to as Lindholme Old Moor. The plaque in memory of Peter Skidmore is on a veteran oak tree in the grounds of the hall. Throughout the fundraising campaign, it's always been a plan to have the specialist group of local naturalists and scientists with a variety of interests and expertise to form the management group. The interests of the group range widely from natural history and biological recording to geology, meteorology, hydrology, archaeology, and the study of past environmental conditions. Paulette and David Benjamin are the landowner representatives. In 2014, there was an opportunity for Gomde to purchase the remains of the land on the island, which included the cottages and a remaining area of 30 acres. At this point, all this land was placed into a higher level stewardship agreement, and the land is overseen by the Lindholme Management Group, who guide the landowners in the task of caring for this rare and precious habitat. The aims of the group were set out at an initial meeting, the primary being to maintain the site as what's known as a viable refugium for natural and managed recolonisation of the surrounding moors as it becomes restored. We needed to complete a baseline inventory of what was living there, including rare, scarce, red data book and protected species. We also need to monitor and, if possible, manage their populations over the years as we carry out management work. We also need to monitor and manage the water table across the site to enable it to function as a wet mire and wet sandy heath habitat. The idea has always been to preserve habitats for species, particularly invertebrates, which are from what we call the wetter end of the habitat spectrum. It's hoped that Lindholme will provide a reservoir of species that can repopulate the wider moor. Two things are essential to achieve this. One is to stop further water loss from the site, and also try and work out how to get the proper water balance on it. The drain blocking work that you can see here in the form of a plastic dam, the actual blocking of the drain started in 1992 under the ownership of the Lyon family, and involved small groups of volunteers from Doncaster Museum and Doncaster Naturalist Society, of which I was a member. The landowners have managed the islands by grazing and mowing of grasslands. 1 hectare of colonising birch scrub has been removed from Old Moor itself. The clearings are visible in this aerial photograph. There's also been woodland and bracken management elsewhere on the island. Regular work on Lindholme Old Moor is undertaken by volunteers each winter to remove birch regrowth and to try and prevent water loss through transpiration. The clearings also provide nesting habitat for the nightjar, for which the site is designated a special protection area. We use an unmanned aerial vehicle to take monitoring photographs of the site at regular intervals. Members of the group have also been monitoring peat saturation by measuring water table depths using homemade dip wells made out of old pieces of plastic plumbing pipe with holes drilled in them. These were installed in 1992 and have been monitored continuously except for an 8-year period when access to the land was denied. But since the purchase of the land by Gomde, we've had support and accommodation of many visits to undertake monitoring. The moorland around Lindholme is entirely reliant on rainfall, and for that reason we recommissioned and upgraded a sophisticated weather station that actually links to the internet and can transmit via the mobile phone network up-to-date information about the meteorological conditions on the moors and keeps a record of rainfall. Since 2015, our efforts at reducing water loss by damming and trying to stop the water from running away has been greatly assisted by something called LIDAR, which is digital terrain model, a very detailed topography map, and it highlighted all the hidden drains that we needed to block. It also showed that the area that we thought was wettest was also the highest area, which suggested to us that we may have retained a body of wet peat, at least in the northeastern quadrant of the site. LiDAR can also be used to gauge vegetation height across the island, and this also showed that stunted growth, shown here by the lowest vegetation, the purple colours, was actually also located in the area which is the highest ground, which seems contradictory, but it also just helped us confirm that the wettest area where the peat was saturated and able to stunt the growth of trees is in the area where a lot of the clearance work has been focused. We also set up what's known as a visiting surveyor's protocol to guide visiting scientists on how to undertake surveys on the island. The agreement emphasises the central tenet of the Buddhist faith, which is to respect and have regard for all living things, and it stipulates that any killing of organisms that takes place has to be kept to an absolute minimum and only for the purposes of scientific research. A number of baseline surveys have been carried out, particularly invertebrates, and we were very pleased to rediscover a Maya pill beetle on Lindholme Old Moor, which is a significant species that was found by Dr. Peter Skidmore in 1997. We've also carried out vegetation mapping to, again, record where the indicators of wet habitats are located. In this case, sphagnum mosses, which are located again in the highest and wettest part of the site, we hope, in the northeastern corner, as is the common cotton grass, another species which prefers to have its feet saturated in saturated peat. Other monitoring surveys that we've carried out include moth trapping evenings, where we lure species to a lamp at night. We don't actually kill the animals, you'd be glad to hear. And nightjar studies, showing where nightjar use the moors and where else they go to feed. We've got a number of veteran oaks on the site, and these are very important for invertebrates, and a number of sampling sessions have gone ahead looking at the specialist species, including red databook species, which live in the rotten wood in the heart of these veteran trees. And every winter, a work party of volunteers undertakes further tree clearance and regrowth control on the actual clearings in Lindholme. I'd now like to turn finally to the influence of the wider moors on Lindholme, and the fact that this LiDAR shows the brighter red and orange colours show the high ground, and the deeper purple and black show the low areas. And you can see that Lindholme is an island, and Jack's Peace and Lom, Lindholme Old Moor, is high and dry compared to the rest of the site. So obviously we are fighting to keep water on the top of a hill. We hope we have raised the water level through the work we've done, and one of our team who does the hydrological monitoring is convinced that we've managed to raise it by at least 1 metre. However, there are various threats from outside that we are unable to control, one of which was the fire in 2020, which really did highlight how the management of the wider moors has a significant impact on the work undertaken by the group. The fire burnt for days, and the strong winds meant there was a real risk of the fire reaching and burning into the peat tracts that surround Lindholme. By luck, most of the island's woodlands, the veteran oaks, and the whole of Jack's Peace escaped the fire. A smouldering peat fire can burn unseen in deep peat, releasing masses of carbon dioxide. And it can also obviously damage the plastic dams that are in place to try and keep the peat wet. Fire is a known risk on the moor and heathland ecosystems generally, but its ability to damage the mosaic of dry heath and Maya habitats on Hatfield has been increased by the desiccation and drainage of the moors over many decades. The peat fires also released large amounts of stored carbon into the atmosphere. A recent study estimates this to be an equivalent to the annual greenhouse gas emissions of 30,000 people. The formation of the raised mire over sand indicates that there must have been a much higher water table, or very high water table at the time of peat and mire inception. The whole of the moors have now dried out due to the combined effects of drainage for peat winning, draining of the surrounding land for agriculture, and the lowering of the aquifer for the public water supply. And the very low rainfall per annum means that the site is already at the cusp of lowland raised mire viability. We're also now experiencing periods of more frequent drought and longer periods of water deficit. And there's greater leisure and recreational use of the moors around, who may not be aware of the risk of fire and the potential consequences. The group's view is that the water level management on the moors must ensure that the remaining peat is saturated in order to prevent oxidation of the peat and to reduce the risk of further damaging peat fires. Despite the restoration of the surrounding mires, large volumes of precious winter rainwater is still allowed to flow off the site. The long-term goal for the moors has to be the establishment of a carbon sequestering mire habitat. I'd like to thank Gomde and in particular Paulette and David for their support in the work of the management group, and I'd like to take any, have any questions later, and I'd be happy to answer them.
Thanks very much, Louise. I've got some questions that I'm looking forward to asking once we're at that part of the presentation. So the next speaker is Gomde trustee, and that's David Benjamin. So when you're ready, David, please turn on your camera. Yep, there you are, and share your screen when you're ready. Looking forward to hearing your talk.
Okay. I'm David Benjamin. I'm one of the trustees at Gomde UK, and in 2009, the charity purchased the at that time, the 120 acres of Lindholme Hall estate as a Buddhist center. The building was not very energy efficient. It was solid brick and single glazed and very uninsulated. It had 18 chimneys and 18 fireplaces, but they didn't all connect. So you had chimneys with no fireplace and fireplaces with no chimney. It was a very drafty environment. It was heated from oil, which had an oil-fire boiler. And so if you look at the bottom, there's a number, 30 metric tons. That's what we've calculated was the footprint that the buildings created just through heating and electricity. And the building area was about 575 square meters. Then next slide. Right, so then the next year we're talking, well, what should our vision be with the property? I mean, we knew that as a Buddhist center, the inner environment, taking care of our thoughts and emotions through meditation, reflection, study, and service, that we were familiar with, but it became very obvious that with the land and how to take care of it, we needed to remember to take care of the outer environment. So relative to the outer environment, taking care of the land and gardens was through conservation. This included the Lindholme group, which you heard about, and also maintaining some of the land through higher level stewardship. And that was really helped by the Lindholme group, because they could give us advice on what needed to happen. But also our buildings, because we were needing to upgrade them, we decided taking care of our buildings was to be able to sustainably harvest sufficient energy to power our buildings through photovoltaic electric generation, and also with a low gasification. Also to minimize the energy use of our buildings through heat pumps and upgrading insulation. Next. So 2012, step one. This is when we're just figuring what happens with the site. Where do we go? We started a process for the courtyard of buildings. It was Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche's vision that we should have a temple on the site. Okay, we said, let's see where we go. We started talking with the planners and working at that. At the same time, we renovated one of the old barns into a meditation hall. And with the meditation hall, we added 9 kilowatts of photovoltaic electric generation and heat pumps to heat it. Now this was able to change our carbon footprint. So at this point, we've gone from 30 to 25 metric tons. Now this carbon footprint is only relative to building energy use. So it's only about the heating of the building and the electricity of the building. And whether how that's generated. We're not calculating, we've got hectares of woodland and the trees are there and that gives us a different carbon footprint. No, this is just trying to get each building as we build it to be able to take care of itself. So that's that. And at that point, we've increased our buildings to 750 square meters. Next slide. And then by 2018, the courtyard development's going on. Planning permission had been granted for the quadrangle courtyard of buildings. We had done the coach house renovation and we'd purchased a log gasification boiler. And that was an 80 kilowatt boiler that burned logs that we could sustainably harvest from our birch forests that were around us. And also then the temple planning permission had been granted. And by this point, our carbon footprint has dropped to 20 metric tons because we're doing more with using the log gasification and also insulation's been improving. And at this point, we have about 1,000 square meters of buildings. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're up to 2021. Where are we on the building? Well, in the courtyard development, we've got the studio workshops going and a studio, eight more en suites. And with that, that creates roof space and the roof space can accommodate more photovoltaic things. They're to a high insulation standards and they'll be heated by 4 heat pumps. And with the temple development, the Thubten Chökor Ling temple, the foundation has been laid. That's what's in the picture that you're looking at, more sky reflecting through the foundation that's paid. But what's amazing is if you look at the bottom, our carbon footprint is now down to 15 metric tons. And we have 1,400 square meters of buildings. And this is mostly through using the heat pumps and the log gasification and good insulation. Next slide. So the plan for achieving net zero carbon, and we've got down 2022, we think it's possible. So we said, let's put that down. The writing in purple is what we need to achieve. In order to do that, we need an electrical transformer upgrade. When we put on the extra solar electric, we need to export some of it back to the grid. The transformer we have is too small. In addition, the transformer is too small for providing enough supply power to the courtyard development and to the temple. And so in order to put all of that to work, you definitely need the transformer upgrade. And then also we need a 40 kilowatt photovoltaic array on the studio workshop building. We need additional heat pumps, 4 additional heat pumps and an additional battery storage. This would be able to allow us to use the electrical energy when the sun's not shining. And if we do all those things, our carbon footprint drops down to 0 metric tons, and the heated buildings will end up being about 1,400 square meters. Next slide. So what is the cost to achieve net zero? There's the upgrade of the electric supply, that's 27,000 pounds. There's 4 heat pumps, 3,500. There's 40 kilowatt solar photovoltaic panels, that's 30,000, and a 13 kilowatt battery, that's 8,500. So altogether, 69,000 pounds is what we will have to spend to become net zero. But some of this we have to spend anyway. Whether we want to become net zero or not, we have to do the electric supply upgrade. We need to put heat in the studio workshop building. So 30,000 of that we're going to have to spend anyway in order to have enough electrical supply for the temple that we're building and also heat for our buildings. But if we do this, and it doesn't seem that much, it comes down to 0 metric tons for the 1,400 square meters. Next slide. So this is net zero Gomde goal, ways to help make it happen. And there's lots of things you can do that are very useful. One is rejoicing and telling others that we have a net zero plan. And that is really nice. When people say, oh, that's a good idea, I'm like that, it's nice. So just doing that does a lot. Also, if you have some extra energy, you can do prayers and aspirations and it goes smoothly and everything happens easily. We always like it when it goes smooth and happens easily, but we take it as it comes. So there's also possibilities of volunteering at Gomde if someone's that inclined. Then as far as donations go, we build what we build by people donating to us. So we're very grateful when anyone donates. And don't think, oh gosh, it's 69,000 pounds. Why would I don't have any money. I could never donate something like that. You shouldn't think like that. You should think many drops fill a bucket and even 5 pounds will connect me to a wonderful project. So think, okay, what can I do to help? Because we could use the help. So let's do it. If you want more information, you can contact me, david@gomde.uk. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. A nice overview of all the key steps that we're taking, the future plans. So if I could just ask Miri, if you're still with us, hopefully the weather has not interrupted your reception. We had a bit of a challenge earlier. It would be great if you could start to share your screen and begin your presentation.
Okay, thanks very much, Jason. Helen has my screen under control, and I'm still here. I'm in rural Nova Scotia for everyone that, and whenever we had bad weather, my satellite internet connection goes down, so it was down most of the day so far. Hopefully it will last. Sunshine's coming through right now. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is I'm looking at climate science in 10 to 12 minutes, so obviously I can't get into too much depth on this. What I want to do is highlight a couple of things that I think is really important to understand from a science side, and also to understand how the science sort of plays into the technological and other options that we have for controlling climate change or controlling global warming. And then that leads to a conclusion that will take us into Erik's talk next. One of the key messages is that we're kind of rolling the dice on climate right now internationally. We have a global warming process that is coming up. We can do projections scientifically. We have a pretty good idea what could happen, and what could happen can pose a very high risk to society. And the next couple of slides will just put that in context a bit. Temperature could, in the next 100 years or so, rise up to a level not seen on Earth for roughly 17 million years, and really possibly as back as much as 40 to 50 million years. If you want to take a look, there's a more extensive backgrounder that we put together on the climate situation and some of the policy options, and that's available at the Gomde webpage. Next slide, please, Helen. Now, everybody knows that it's getting warmer. This is just a simple infographic that shows the last 150 years and the relative seasonal temperatures. There's no surprises here for anybody that follows climate change. The one thing I'd like everyone to notice, though, is that we really the warming really has started to kick in back really in the 1980s. And we've just been getting progressively hotter and hotter, and we set more and more records every year. Next slide. Now, if we step way back to look at geological time frames in the last 500 million years, we have phases in the Earth's history, in the climate history, that we have not had polar ice caps, and we have phases during which we have had polar ice caps. And you can see that there's fluctuations. Now, one of the things to really note here is that these fluctuations that we see, say back 350 to 250 million years ago, these are fluctuations that took millions or possibly tens of millions of years to go through. Now, if we follow through time and we look, we consider the entirety of human evolution, also evolving as species, has taken place over roughly the last 300,000 years. And that's all in the, if you look to the very right of the chart, that last blue blip that goes down and comes up, well, that's the entirety of human evolution is on the upswing there. And where you can see my little square icon that's with a little sunshine in front of it, just take note of that for the next slide, because that's potentially where we're going with the trajectory that we're on for climate change right now. So we're going, we're taking a jump that's geologically very significant in the space of, say, 150 or 200 years, which is just the briefest snap of the finger from a geological time perspective. Next slide, please. Now, more recently, this chart, oh, I should apologize too, both of these charts were from the US, so they have Fahrenheit temperature scales on them. The dividing line between the world with ice caps versus world without is, I think it's about 17.5 Celsius. If we look at the past 20,000 years now, we are in an environment where we have a warming climate that's come up gradually. Agriculture started about 9,000 years ago. We had civilization slowly develop over time. And what you see in this chart is this very, very sharp bend up in temperatures. And this corresponds with that time range, basically post-World War II, something called the Great Acceleration, where we had rapidly increasing population, rapidly increasing consumption, rapidly increasing wealth, and rapidly increasing temperature. So what we're on right now is like almost from a larger time frame, we're on this dead vertical, just shooting straight up in our temperatures on Earth. And the question for us now is, okay, so we're on the elevator, the express elevator going up. Where do we get off? And that's really the question that we're trying to grapple with internationally. And you see in this diagram, there's the blue circle, the low CO2 future near the bottom. That's probably another 1 to 1.5 degrees above where we are right now. We're almost up towards 1 degree Celsius rise now. If we really take rapid action and control things, we should be able to keep temperature change relatively modest. If, however, we just keep on with industrialization as sort of business as usual, we could go as high as a 4 to 5 degree temperature change. And that red high CO2 future that you see here, that relates back in the geological time scale. That was the little square icon that I had in there. So we're in a situation where we know things are potentially bad, and there are potential consequences for this. Next slide, please. I guess before I get into this, just taking one step, just to elaborate. So what are the consequences? It's not just temperatures, average temperatures warming. It's we have extreme temperatures. So I'm rural Nova Scotia, as I said, from Canada. We watched in horror as we hit the national high temperature record in Canada was broken 3 days in a row in a little place called Lytton, British Columbia. This was the last few days of June. And after 3 days of record temperatures, there was a spark from a train that set off a wildfire, and it just incinerated the entire town. So extreme weather is one thing that we encounter more of. Sea level, the oceans are changing quite drastically. Ocean temperature, ocean acidification, and sea level rise are all related to temperature change to global warming. The expansion of the range of human diseases, tropical diseases into temperate climates is another thing. So we have all kinds of different consequences of rising temperatures. Biodiversity loss. If we go to the extremes with temperature rise, we're going to hit very, very high levels of biodiversity loss. So lots of consequences. Now, on the policy and response side, there are many things that we can do to help address the global warming situation. And we have the Paris Accord in place, which has a series of national voluntary pledges to help reduce emissions. The key message from this is, I think, from a science policy perspective, is that even with the Paris Agreement fully implemented, we're not on track to keep temperature to a level where we need to keep it. Next slide. So we have all different sorts of possible solutions. There's some really cool stuff going on with carbon capture and storage right now. We have renewable energy, and we've already seen that at Gomde, we have photovoltaic solar panels that have been installed and have been in place for quite a while now. There's other new technologies coming out, like for automobiles and for planes and for ships. So there's lots of stuff going on in the technological realm. We also have ecological fixes and solutions that contribute to this: reforestation, wetlands restoration, peatlands rehabilitation. So the peatland rehabilitation piece at Gomde is also something that fits into the bigger picture. And from governance perspective, we have governance, regulatory and non-regulatory measures we can take all the way from the very local level, say at Doncaster, having certain types of building codes, all the way up to national and international levels. We also have a carbon credit trading system it's established, but it's not really super widely used yet. But it's potentially important in the context of Gomde, because there are measures that can be taken to sequester carbon in peatlands. That is potentially, over the long term, if carbon credits can be set up, it could be a source of revenue, actually a sustainable source of long-term revenue for Gomde as well, and for other organizations that take conservation measures and measures that bind carbon for long terms. And then finally, we have social and behavioral types of interventions or measures we can take. And largely, there's a lot of talk about dietary choices, meat versus vegetarianism, local food versus international imports. And there's also quite an emphasis on travel right now. So we know that the richest 1% of people in the world have a vastly disproportionate impact on carbon emissions from aviation, from the air travel industry. Next slide. I'm not going to spend time with this. This is a little bit complicated. The left panel shows carbon emissions, and the right panel shows the corresponding temperature change. The key message in here is that even if we go on a radical decarbonization of the economy, our temperature is still going to keep going up. And think of that's because we have carbon in the atmosphere. It's we have legacy effects from all that we've done in the past. Also notice on that left-hand chart that the green line going down is a really, really radical decarbonization to keep temperature rise to about 1 degree. In fact, we would be looking at global negative net emissions or net carbon capture by the year 2060 to 2070 if we want to control climate change. And we are not on the trajectory to do that right now. Next slide. Again, I'm not going to go into detail in this, but what I want to highlight is we have carbon emissions that are rising this chart doesn't show the red business as usual trajectory, but the Paris Accord pledges and current policies are shown in that blue triangle. Our current measures, if we fully implement Paris Accord pledges, we're probably going to hit like somewhere around a 2.5, 3.5 degree average temperature increase. To take that downward slope, the green shaded area and the yellow shaded area in the slide, to get down to where we really need to be to control temperature, keep it to 1.5 to 2 degree rise, we need to do a massive amount of cutting of our annual emissions. And this can be done through curtailing emissions before they go into the atmosphere, or potentially carbon capture to pull carbon back out of the atmosphere. And technologically, and from a governance perspective, if we know our pledge, the Paris Accord situation is still taking us too high, we have to figure out how we can bridge this gap in carbon emissions. And how can we take all the necessary measures to bring us back, or to get us down. And this is the yellow and the green double arrow figures on the right-hand side of the chart. Next slide. So we have technological, we have ecological, we have governance solutions. And I think for me, one of the main messages coming out of our current situation is that we need some pretty radical changes in sort of human behavior and human values to really come through and fill this carbon emission gap that we have. Now, so my PhD is actually in the area of economics and policy analysis. So for the longest time, I was always of the opinion that we could govern our way out of this situation. We could, set the rules and regulations and enticements and both the carrots and the sticks, and get to a stage where we were able to sort of shape people's behavior, the behavior of individuals and companies, so that they would be energy efficient enough that we could avoid problems. And as time has gone past, my opinion is maybe over the past 12, 15 years swung totally the other way, that I think that our social and behavioral solutions are the most important now. And that's what we really have to focus on as we go forward to really try to fill up this gap. We need the technological, we need the ecological, we need the governance, but those three alone, in my view, aren't sufficient to get us where we need to go. So, and that is my last slide, and that's sort of the natural segue for the next presentation by Erik.
Thanks, Murray. Some really informative slides there, and definitely a great segue to our next speaker, Erik. So when you're ready, Erik, please turn on your screen and share your slides if you have them when you're ready. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I don't have slides. I just want to thank Gomde UK for inviting me to participate in what I think is almost for sure a historic moment. And this effort of Gomde's is vitally important if we're going to make the world a safe, healthy place for, well, life itself. And of course, Gomde isn't going to do it on its own, all by itself, but has to start someplace. And I also feel that as a Buddhist, as somebody who is trying in my own life to make the kind of shift in view that Murray was alluding to, I think it's incumbent then that manifests in action and in actual tangible results. And I think it's amazing what Gomde's doing. And we've heard from 3 people today who've been working tirelessly on this. I think I'm just here because I have a big mouth, but I think there's a whole bunch of people that have been working so hard on this, and it's an incredible vision. And I know myself, I'm very inspired by it, and I hope that many of you feel the same way. I'd like to start with the Buddha. I have this little statue I thought I'd show everybody. Probably seen an image like this, but you'll notice that Buddha is a beautiful old statue. Buddha is touching the ground. This is the most common representation of Buddha, where he's touching the ground with his hand. This Buddha did this just moments before he completely awakened. He touched the earth. This simple gesture has many levels of meaning. I'm not going to be able to in a short talk and cover them all, but we can talk about a few. Bhumi Pasha, that's what it's called. Bhumi Pasha is the name of this gesture. It means to touch the earth or touch the ground. The earth, right? It's our physical ground, our home. And so while making this outer gesture, Buddha was touching the ground of existence. He's bringing his own mind home so that to its authentic source. And most importantly, is Buddha was also showing, by way of his realization, by making this touching the earth, which, by the way, the earth shook when the Buddha touched it. He touching the ground of being, the ground of ultimate nature of existence, who Buddha really is, who we really are, what reality really is, authentic, genuine ground. That's what Buddha's touching. But in another way, he's showing the complete, I guess my talk's supposed to be something about inner and outer world. I don't know, that's what Paulette asked me, and I was a little distracted. I said, sure. So he's showing the complete arbitrariness of our so-called outer world versus the inner world. There's actually, this is, you can say so much of the problem for us as individuals, this arbitrary distinction between outer world and inner world, as well as the as collective individuals, how that affects ourselves and our entire environment, because it's so much by thinking this is me, this is mine, this is, and I'm separate, I'm an island. This is where the whole trouble begins. And this is, Buddha taught about this on and on and on. You can say it's one of the fundamental teachings of Buddha. Well, what do we mean by it's arbitrary? Because what it means is everything I do affects all of you. Everything all of you do affects me. It affects our environment, affects all the beings within it. And this we can see, and I mean, like some people went into the jungle to develop it in the name of progress, and they uncovered a virus which is now spread all over the world and brought the world economy to a standstill and killed millions and millions of people. We're all connected. We think that that it's my ideas, my thoughts, my emotions. But if we really take a close look, these things are because of habits. They're due to the culture we're born in, the kind of parents we had, then later in life, what tribe we want to identify with. That's why what people think is really beautiful in one part of the world, in a totally different part of the world, they look at that and they say that juxtapositions of colors is completely ugly. I don't like it at all. It's garish. Or for example, you know, years ago, Europeans had no problem with the fact that most Europeans had no problem with the fact that they were going to Africa and enslaving people and shipping them to the New World. Now everybody hears this and they think, oh, that's terrible, and it's a black stain in our history. So this is, I mean, it's clear that so much of who we are is just formed through interaction and through interconnection. Now, the good news is we have free choice. We can choose to continue to just be prisoner to habits, or we can wake up. The problem is that distinguishing continuously in the way that we do it, this outer world from our inner world, it causes us so much misery. So we can choose. We can begin to question, is what I'm doing authentic? Is that really authentic, or is that just a result of all my trauma and drama I've lived through, the culture I grew up in, and so forth? And in fact, the Mahayana approach to spiritual transformation is that by working for others, it's the best way to care for ourselves. The Dalai Lama calls this enlightened self-interest. I always thought that was a beautiful way to put it. So this is the principle on which Gomde, my teacher, Kebji Tukulurjan Rinpoche, who had this great dream that one day there would be centers all over the world where the tradition that he almost single-handedly preserved when he came out of Tibet just before the Cultural Revolution. He had this idea, then his son, Chiginima Rinpoche, put that into motion, and now we have Gomde in UK and many other places in the world. And this is all kind of coming out of this Mahayana aspiration, the way that we can make the best progress, be the most healthy, be the most well in ourselves, is by caring for others. So coming back to Bhumi Pasha, this touching the earth, just even in an ordinary way, when we say down to earth, we say someone's down to earth, we mean they're authentic, they're honest, they're reliable. So this, even in our ordinary, in our culture, there's some recognition of the importance of touching the earth, of being down to the earth, that we become authentic. And when we touch the earth, which we do every day, I think, through touching that, we're touching the same earth that Buddha Shakyamuni, the previous Buddha, Dipamkara, Jesus, Muhammad, Moses, all the other sublime spiritual masters and sages from all the different amazing spiritual traditions that are present on this earth, they all use the earth as a basis for their practice, a basis for their spiritual transformation. Not just great spiritual adepts, but all the amazing scientific breakthroughs, medical breakthroughs, poetry, art, all the richness and joy of human life comes through touching the earth. This earth provided a container for all this incredible, transcendent, spiritual transformation. And I think it's important that we honor that, right? It's just like when you come into, like, say, a Buddhist meditation hall, or say a temple or a church, or a mosque even. If you're a considerate person, you're mindful not to desecrate it. Maybe it's not your tradition, but still you think, oh, I should be respectful because this is considered a holy place. And in fact, maybe even if we want to honor it, we try different ways of honoring. Maybe we prostrate, that's how Buddhists do it, or we make the cross, or Jewish males wear a yarmulke on their head. But whatever the traditional appropriate way of showing respect is, maybe then we try to do that. So when we live on this holy earth, the place where so many sublime beings have demonstrated by example of their lives the full potential that human existence offers, when we should be thinking, how do I at least not desecrate this holy earth, holy Mother Earth? How do we honor it? How do we keep it a sacred place? And the funny thing is, when we start to think like that, then I think what happens is some of the things David was saying about celebrating, maybe making prayers, even the act of donating, even if you don't have much money, and just give a penny or a pound, but with the right motivation, it begins to transform things. And the thing is that kindness, that care, that compassion, that's also contagious. That's a good kind of virus we can spread. That's a beneficial virus. And that wonderful thing is that when we affect that change in ourselves, we begin to see the falseness and the arbitrariness of this distinction of me and you and inner and outer. It becomes less and less of an issue. And we ourselves may also discover the ultimate ground of existence. And that's the point. So that we can see right now this opportunity to join together and make a transformation of mind, a transformation of heart, will also result in a transformation in the world. And it's so important. We don't, I think Murray was trying to make the point, we don't have a lot of time. As Buddhists, we like to talk a lot about impermanence, and we see impermanence in action. So please, I hope that we can, all of us, take this really to heart, join together, and hold hands, at least virtually through Zoom, and be bodhisattvas of climate change, of peace, of inner and outer transformation. Thank you very much.
Very inspiring presentation. Brilliant presentation. Got lots to think about there. Thanks very much, Erik. So I'm just going to ask everyone to turn on their webcams, please, or the speakers, and I will ask some questions. So we are over time, which we kind of expected. So I'm just going to try and summarize some of the questions that we've been getting through, and just kind of generate a bit of a conversation on some of the points. So if all the speakers can turn on their cameras, please. What I was going to ask first, maybe, Erik, since you've just spoken, it might be a nice lead on to a question that's come through, which is essentially, we've got lots of people that understand the importance of things like biodiversity, protecting the wildlife and so forth, but it seems like not many people do care about those things, or at least that's the way it appears. And so how do we move people? How do we change people's minds? Could you give any advice on that?
I think first is to look within and think, how do I change my mind? And what is it in me that needs to be different? I've been every year taking a look myself at my carbon footprint, and my wife and I, every, 3 to 6 months, have a conversation. So can we do something a little different? So we try, it doesn't matter the things we've done, but the point is we've slowly, over a period of just a few years, are living in a very, very different way than we had been. So I think first we have to do this in ourselves, and then as a natural consequence of who we are, we will have an effect. It will have an effect, because when you talk to other people, I think the biggest fear that many people have is what happens to their way of life. And when they can see that through our example that our way of life is quite okay, you see, then that makes a huge difference. There's a whole bunch, this is a very, very complex question, and there's a whole bunch of things that just being having a good attitude, frankly, in and of itself isn't enough, but that's where it's got to start, because who makes decisions? It's not governments, it's people. Governments are made of people, and by transforming ourselves, that's the best way we can begin to transform the world. And through our transformation, it actually does have an effect on others.
It's really quite motivating. Thanks very much. So I think there's an interesting question to lead on from that, which Miriam, I think you might be best placed to answer this. What would be the one thing that we could do in our daily lives, from your perspective as an environmental economist, that could have an effect?
I've always advocated a vegetarian diet. For me, I've been vegetarian more or less for 35 years now, and it was from an energy consumption perspective. And I realized that some people can't go fully on vegetarian. And I realized that some types of meat are grain fed, so it's not really like we're not taking away, we're not taking away resources, so we're not really doing much with regard to carbon. But when we look at things like sort of factory produced meats, especially, they're very, very carbon intensive. And I guess everything is, the consumption is such a complicated thing. And again, like this is what in economics we study about trade-offs that people make. And I find that, even as somebody that does a lot of work with oceans over years, I can't go into a supermarket and discern what really is like energy efficient seafood, for example, and sustainable seafood, despite all the labeling initiatives and things that go with it. So it takes some time. I would say, besides like trying to reduce your carbon intake via your diet, it's also very, very important just to spend a little bit of time to really try to start to get a handle and start to understand what your different consumption choices imply, rather than just going out and buying something sort of without thinking. And everybody's so pressed for time these days, so busy, that it's easy to do what's convenient. And maybe part of the change also might be, spending a bit of time on what's maybe, what can I do that's incrementally better that really doesn't affect my quality of life really whatsoever.
Brilliant, thanks very much. I've got a practical question for Louise, and then I've got one for you, David Benjamin. Louis just gone. He does have a signal problem, so that could be that. So Louise, this is about the question on the peat, really, and it feels like this has come through a different channel, and we've seen a number of fires, haven't we, develop across the world, and to see that happen on Gomde, I think was quite striking for a lot of the community. I mean, are there measures that are being taken place of, or that can be done to reduce the chances of that happening again?
Yeah, I mean, with the moors, the main thing is the fact that the peat is dry, and even if it's not on fire, it's still oxidizing through atmospheric loss of carbon dioxide. So even though it's not burning visibly, you've still got that to concern yourself, and that obviously releases, carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It is increased by the increasing temperature, the seasonal desiccation, the increasing amount of dry periods that we might experience will just exacerbate it. The obvious way of preventing that is to wet it, but that is tricky. You've also got the vegetation that will burn on the top, but if that really burns quite deeply, it will then burn into the peat. So you've got vegetation control, but all that takes usually some form of energy and probably some kind of mechanized means of doing it, which normally involves using fossil fuels. So you've got that dilemma to consider as well. Re-wetting it is the best way, but the problem is that what was a dome of peat is now like a basin. It's a hollow. So you've got the problem in that you want to create the habitat that was there before, but if you're going to re-wet it, you'll effectively flood that out. So there's a balancing act, and it's difficult to achieve, but we try to do what you can. You maybe have to think in terms of water management on the site, being a bit more clever about holding it on in certain areas, draining it, holding in sacrificial areas where the vegetation won't grow, and then using that to re-wet during the dry periods. We have to be a bit more sophisticated because we have damaged the system. It is not a proper raised mire system at the moment. But it is in essence, peat has to be wet, and that's the problem we've got.
Sounds like we've got some proper strategies in place anyway. Thanks. I was going to ask another question to David, and this really is, these series of talks have been kind of under the header really of the temple. So it'd be great if you could share how this ecological strategy of net zero fits in with the vision of the temple project.
Yes, I'll be happy to answer that. The temple is one more of the buildings that we'll be building, and it will also maintain our net zero as we're going along building it. It won't the quality of what we will change in it. It will have the same insulation quality, so the building won't have much of an energy impact. And we'll have additional solar panels to go with it, which won't be visible to detract from the temple, but will then provide the extra energy that needs to be built into the temple. Also, there's a lot of really clever ways that the building is designed to become a chimney, so that the heat, if we have 500 people in it, can be dissipated out, so that you don't need to use mechanical forms of air conditioning, and at the same time how to survive the heat and move it up and down inside the building. But this is, I think, it could be a whole presentation on how the temple is going to work. It's part of our continuing building, and the idea is that all buildings that come online once we get to net zero will be net zero, and that's the concept.
Brilliant. So I've got some questions coming through, and they're kind of fairly technical, but we may as well ask a few of them whilst they're here. So Miri, this question is essentially about green homes, and I wonder if you had a view on them as being a good strategy for the future. So someone's asked this who's got a bit of specialist background. So what do we think on how we built homes? Can that impact climate change if we were only to build green homes from here on?
And well, I would say first thing, David knows a lot about construction, so he might even be better to chime in on that one than me. I mean, I think green homes are fabulous if we can get them to a stage that they are affordable and can be put together. And there's a lot of components that come into that. It's having contractors that are capable of building them, having the techniques down. It's unfortunate. We have a society where there's some real disparities in wealth distribution, and maybe the people that are fortunate go buy a Tesla and get a green home. That's awesome. But we also need to be considering, I think, that how do we develop green technologies that can be put into mass and affordable housing? How do we deal with the questions that really have larger impact? As again, my economics hat on, I'm looking, so what are the costs and benefits of having a very small percentage of the people maybe invest or convert to green homes? It's an awesome move. Everybody has to do everything that they can. But at the same time, I'm looking at, well, how do we get mass adoption for the projects that really have a potential to take off a big chunk of carbon emissions? And a lot of these are long-term initiatives, but we need to, I'll leave it at that and let David add anything if he wants to in this.
Yes, I mean, I think you can build houses that are very energy efficient, but if you use your heating sources like heat pumps, where for the same kilowatt of electricity, you get 4 kilowatts of heat, working like on the principle of, say, a refrigerator, then there's a lot of technology that's very clever that will make it so that we can reduce it fairly easily, the amount of energy usage that we have. So that's what I would say. You don't have to build them so that the house is completely green, but you make it so that it doesn't need to use so much energy.
Brilliant. Hope that's a good tip from this person studying in this area. And well, we'll have one final question to Erik, and then maybe a quick final wrap up. So Erik, I was wondering from your, experience of Buddhism, if there is, aside from developing oneself and their own motivations, is there anything else you'd like to kind of draw on within the Buddhist teachings that could be useful in the context of this, in the context of, climate change?
Well, I think I said a few of those things already, but I think that, look, the point of working on yourself is so that then you're really able to go and help. It doesn't, although this is scary, although there are things about it that are going to make us angry, if we don't, we have to find a way to engage with the world, all of us, to make this change through love and kindness and care. And yes, it has to be done pretty damn quickly. So there is no magic bullet here, other than it takes a little bit of going within, a kind of self-discipline, but then out of that comes this wellspring of love and compassion. And that's what the world needs right now. We're having trouble talking to each other these days. It's sort of like you can see as our so-called inner world gets more and more shaken up, the outer world also reflects that. And people are, in my estimation, are pretty upset, and the world is in a pretty upset spot. So there is a connection there. And that doesn't take away from any of the really down-to-earth practical kinds of things that Murray and David and Louise have been talking about. These are really, really vital that we understand these kinds of things. But then for us as agents of change, we have to be ourselves in a certain place to help make that happen. So I'm sorry, all I can do is repeat what I've said already, but that's where it probably bears repeating.
Oh, I think that's real great, to have that reframed again. Yeah, thanks. And I think we may close it there then. And if there's any very specific questions, because there's some quite experienced people in, and apologise that we're not been able to get through every question, but we have tried to save them, and I will do our best to perhaps get them answered and see if we can share them some other way. But I'd just like to say a very big thanks to everyone and everyone who's been involved with this webinar, and all the trustees' help and all the strategy that's gone on so far to get us here. I think we've got one other session coming up, which is about the temple and the temple symbology and how that can teach in the world. So this essentially has been so far one of 3 sessions, and we're looking forward to doing another one. And this has been a really powerful session. I've learned a lot, and thanks very much, everyone, and hope to see everyone soon. Thanks, everyone. Do say bye if you want.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.